Hilchot Yesodey Hatorah is the first, it's the opening of the Mishneh Torah after the Hakdama. It's the fundamentals of the Torah. What does that mean? The fundamentals of the Torah. Well, there are two things. There's fundamentals of the Torah, Yesodey Torah, and there is Ikarei HaEmunah. And those are not necessarily the same thing. All right, Ikarei Emunah are the 13 Ikarim that the Rambam set forth as 13 Ikarim that you have to believe in order to consider yourself part of Am Yisrael. Right? For instance, one of Ikarei Emunah is the belief in Tehiyat HaMetim. If you don't believe in Tehiyat HaMetim, then you're kofar in one of the Ikarim, and you get Onish Karet. You're not part of Am Yisrael. However, you won't find one word about Tehiyat HaMetim in Yesodey Torah, because it's not a fundamental of the Torah. The fundamental of the Torah, everything that he's going to bring here in Hilchot Yesodey Torah, are basically things that you need to acknowledge or need to understand in order for the Torah to be eternal or to have any meaning to it. For instance, we believe in Nevuah. That's essential. It's not just an ikar of the emunah. If you don't believe in Nevuah, then you don't believe in Torah min hashamayim. And there's no basis for the Torah if there's no Nevuah. If there were no Tehiyat HaMetim, that would still not be an issue as far as the legality of the Torah or the fundamentals of the Torah. All right. So everything that we're going to be studying, and also everything else that we won't be studying today, that's in Hilchot Yesodey Torah, is all things that need to be acknowledged and need to be understood for the Torah to have a strong foundation. And the first of that, the Yesod of the Yesodot, the foundation of all the foundations, ve'amud ha'chokmot, and it's also the pillar of wisdom. And this is what drove scientific inquiry always. Is lida, is that knowledge, the acknowledgement, the understanding, sheyesham masui rishon, that there is a primary being. What does that mean, masui rishon? So when we start the Torah, Bereshit bara Elohim, and the Rambam, he talks about the word rishon and reshit in the Moreh Nebuchim. Right? It says, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim et haaretz. When God first created the universe, he created the shamayim and the haaretz, the physical universe, and we'll say the metaphysical universe. So when we say Rishon, right, if he is primary to the universe itself in order to create it, then this Rishon isn't a Rishon in time or Rishon in space. This is a Rishon, this primary being is primary in the chain of causality. It says a Rishon as in Ilah ve'alul. We'll talk about later. For every Ilah there's an alul. For every cause there's an effect. Or for every effect there was a cause, something that caused it. And when we say Umasui Rishon, we're not saying he's the first in time, that he was before the universe. I mean, not just that he was before the universe, but everything that you want to interrogate, lachkor, any phenomenon in the universe, you go into this chain of causality. And we all know this from when we're children, right? Abba, Daddy, why is there a rainbow in the sky? You say, oh, because, after the rain, the light from the sun refracts in the droplets of water in the rain and causes a rainbow. Okay, but why does that happen? And okay, you start explaining about light, how there's different wavelength, and when it hits water, each one gets a slightly different angle so that it refracts. Why is there many different wavelengths? And you go back talking about what light is, and you have to because the sun radiates. It's at a very high temperature. It radiates light. Why is the sun at such a high temperature? Because there's extreme mass molecules, and in the center of the sun, the core, it heats up from all the pressure. You go into gravity. They say, okay, so but how does gravity work? Okay, it's one of the four. I'm skipping some steps on the way, just to get to the point. It's the separation of the four fundamental forces at the moment of creation. You have the electromagnetic, the gravitational force, the weak and the strong nuclear forces. And okay, but what caused that? What caused that separation of the forces? You say, okay, well, maybe it was the Big Bang, or you say, ultimately, you always get back to this Matsui Rishon, this primary cause, this primary being of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Or as why, and when you say why, as the Rambam says in the Moreh Nevuchim, you say kach hafes ha'el. After that, there's nothing else you can do. But this is also Amud HaChochmot, because when you're studying science, when you're trying to develop your Chochmah, you're always just trying to uncover that next step in the chain of cause and effect between the phenomenon that we're witnessing and that primary being. That's our way of getting closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, understanding the steps that unfolded from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to what we are witnessing now. Vehu mamsi kol hanimsa. And this primary being is mamsi. He creates everything in existence. And the diuk here is not vehu himtzi kol hanimsa. We said we're not just looking as primary in time, but every single thing that's around us, the entire universe, in order for it to exist, it needs to be held in existence. Before needs to be actually held in existence. And the mashal of this is as if you're imagining something in your mind. And this is how I learned it from Rabbi Faur. So imagine something in your mind. As long as you're imagining that thing in your mind, it has its existence. Once you're distracted from it, poof, it disappears. Right? The entire universe, it's not something that God once created and it just goes on its own, right? Like a carpenter who builds a table, and there's no longer any more relationship between that carpenter and the table. It's as if you are, or HaKadosh Baruch, it's as if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is constantly holding us in existence. I think also maybe that's one of the fundamental differences between our understanding of creation and, let's say, the philosophers or the classical understanding of creation, right? We say Azav Hashem et haaretz. There is no HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He has no hashgacha in this world. For us, hashgacha of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is essential to the existence of the world. Without HaKadosh Baruch Hu constantly keeping us in mind, we would have no existence at all. Vehu mamsi, now, before, tamid, all the time, kol hanimsa, everything that is in existence. V'chol hanimsaim, min shamayim va'aretz, u'ma benehen, everything that's in existence, from the shamayim, so the shamayim, you would say, is the metaphysical world, or the one that we can perceive physically. It's not our physical universe. Va'aretz, and that would be the physical universe. Uma benehem, and whatever is in between. Lo nimseu ella me'amitat himmaseu. Their existence is all only derived, only comes from that level of existence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The truth of his level. And we'll get more into that soon. What does that mean? Amitat himmaseu. I think we spoke about it maybe in the previous class or one of the previous ones, that there are different levels of existence and in a way you can say the Rambam here talks about relativity, right? There's relative truth and there's ultimate truth. And there is only one ultimate truth. And anyone that says he knows the truth is, well, you can say, well, do you know the mind of God? There's only one ultimate truth, and that is HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. The mashal that we brought is, if we go back to imagining something, holding up an image in your imagination, you give that image life. You created something in your mind. Is that thing real? And maybe to other things in that level of reality, they may consider themselves real, but that's a relative real. It's yahasi to themselves in relation to whatever level is above them, your level, who's holding them in imagination. They're batel, they're heaven. And that is what we'll read later, where it says, Ein od milvado. Only HaKadosh Baruch Hu is emet. Everything else is a derivative, and it's as if it's just an imagination. So anything that's in existence, its truth is relative to whatever level is above it, which is relative to the level above it, which is, eventually we get back to that Matsui Rishon, which is the only ultimate truth, the only real, true thing that exists. All right, any questions so far? Or comments? All right. Ve'im ya'aleh al hadda'at shehu eno masui. Right? If someone would think that he does not exist, that en davar acher yahonihim mas'ot. Right? So as we mentioned before, but it's not like a carpenter who makes a table. A carpenter makes a table, he saws it off, there's no more relation. The table burns, doesn't affect the carpenter. The carpenter dies, it doesn't affect the table. There is no relation between them. So theoretically, there could be a situation where there's the creation of the carpenter, and the carpenter is no longer in existence. He's no longer alive, and that doesn't affect the existence of the table. And we say here, no. But if in our understanding, in our model of how creation works, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't exist, HaKadosh Baruch Hu couldn't have died. He can't not exist just by the fact that there is other things in existence. And because nothing else could be in existence if that Masui Rishon, that primary being, isn't himself in existence. Because he needs to hold everything in existence. ואם יעלה על הדעת שאין כל הנמצאים מלבדו מסויים, הוא לבדו יהיה מסוי ולא יבטל הוא לביטולן. All right, and if someone would think that not everything is in existence from him, he says, no. הוא לבדו יהיה מסוי. He's the only thing that can outlive everything. Nothing can cancel his existence. לא יבטל הוא לביטולן, שכל הנמצאים צריכים לו. They're all dependent on him. והוא ברוך הוא אינו צריך להם ולא לאחד מהם. So he doesn't need them, in general as a collective, and he doesn't need any specific or one being in them. For instance, there's the goof, and people like to give the example of a goof and a neshama, right? The neshama, once the goof dies, the neshama, we'll see in the 4th chapter, if we ever get that the neshama dies along with the goof. The neshama in the Rambam is something more physical, right? But the goof itself, right, has different parts to it. There's parts that are essential to its life, and there are parts that aren't so essential to his life, right? If you lose your hand, you can continue living. If you lose your head or your heart, you're dead, right? And in the Moreh Nevuchim, the Rambam, he says, Ha'olam ish Adam olam katan. The whole structure of the universe is, or the structure of man mimics the structure of the universe, and it's one living being. The universe itself, you can think of it as a body, one living being, and same as there are different organs in the body that the universe needs in order to live, so too in the universe there are different parts or different we'll call it different systems in the universe that the universe needs in order to carry on living. But none of this affects HaKadosh Baruch Hu's life or existence. Lefichach, therefore, en amitato ka'amitat ahad mehem. Right? The truthness or the level of reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not comparable to any other being. Hu she'anavi omer v'Hashem Elohim emet. What does that mean? Hu levado ha'emet ve'en le'acher emet ka'amito. Right? God our Lord is truth. Only He is truth. Nothing else can be compared. It's categorically different. His level of existence, His level of reality, His level of truth is categorically different than anything else that we are familiar with. Torah omeret en od milevado. There's nothing else beside Him. K'lomar en sham masui emet milevado kemoto. Nothing exists on this level of reality except for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaMatzui hazeh, this being, this primary being, Hu Eloha Ha'olam, Adon Kol Ha'aretz. Right, so first of all, you need to understand this, understanding the existence of the primary being and his level of reality and his level of truth is essential to the Torah. Well, first of all, you can't have a Torah if you don't have a universe. You can't have a universe, and you can't have a universe if you don't have this primary being. And this primary being is also an Eloha. In Eloha is not just a supreme level of truth. Eloha means authority. En karui Elohim el bet din gadol shebe'eretz Yisrael. Right? That's the highest level of rabbinic authority. So he is Eloha Ha'olam. He is the supreme authority of the world. Of humanity. Adon kol ha'aretz. Ha'olam usually refers to humanity, everybody in the world, and ha'aretz is the physical world, the actual universe itself. So he's the master of the universe, and he's also the supreme authority of mankind. Vehu ha'manhig ha'galgal b'koach she'en lokes b'tachnit. And he is also the leader of this great galgal, and he does this with an infinite force and power. All right, Hagalgal is the structure of the universe, is in Galgalim. Today we perceive the universe differently than they did then. All right, we have a more accurate picture of what the universe looks like, but it's all rotating. Whether you look into the small, micro, if you zoom in microscopically and you have atoms with the electrons orbiting it, or if you go look up a moon orbiting the Earth, planets orbiting the sun orbiting the center of the galaxy, everything is in motion and everything is moving in a circular form. And this force that moves the universe, it has no beginning or end. Right? It's an infinite force, it never stops. And we know this, for this galgal is always in motion, and it never stops. And this can't be in motion, and it can't be moving if there is not something investing that energy to move it. והוא ברוך הוא המסבב אותו בלא יד ובלא גוף. And he's the one who's always constantly pushing or investing the energy to turn this galgal, right? And he does this without any physical form, without any mass, no guf and no yad and no hand. All right. Any questions? All right. Vidiat davar ze mitzvat aseh. All right, and this is the first mitzvah that the Rambam brings, also in Minyan HaMitzvot, right? Knowing this, acknowledging, what is this? What is the mitzvah here? What do we need to acknowledge? Michael, any suggestions?
I guess the existence of God as defined by Rambam.
Okay, so that may seem where it's leading, but that's probably also how many people perceive it. But look what he says. What was this last thing that we were talking about? And what is the mitzvah? Shene'emar Anochi Adonai Elohecha. The mitzvah is to acknowledge the supreme authority of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We understand he's the supreme authority because we understand that also he's the ultimate level of truth. And he's the ultimate level of truth because he's the ultimate reality, living on the ultimate level of existence, the only thing that actually really exists. Anochi Adonai, right? I said my name, it's like, I, Sammy, am your friend. And he's saying, Anochi Adonai Elohecha, I am your supreme authority. וכל המעלה על דעתו שיש שם אלוה אחר חוץ מזה. And if you were to acknowledge any other supreme authority other than HaKadosh Baruch Hu, other than this primary being, over belot ta'aseh. You're going against the lo ta'aseh shene'emar lo yeh lecha elohim acherim al panai. In my face you should never have any other authority that is above me. וכפר בעיקר, שזהו העיקר הגדול שהכל תלוי בו. This is the first ikar, this is the primary ikar, the Yesodey Yesodot, that everything else leans on this ikar. And if you don't acknowledge the supreme authority of God, you're not acknowledging the supreme truth, the Masui Rishon itself, and therefore not acknowledging that one thing that could bring everything else into existence. כפר בעיקר, שזהו העיקר הגדול שהכל תלוי בו. All right. Eloah ze ihadhu. Right. This Eloah, right, up until now we call him the Masui Harishon. Now we acknowledge that he is also our supreme authority, supreme being, and he is one. Ihadhu eno lo shenayim velo yater al shenayim. Ela ihad she'en ki yihudo ihad min ha'ahadim hanimsaim ba'olam. Right, he is not double, right, and he's not multiple. Right, in Hebrew we don't just have singular and plural, we also have du, right, like michnasayim, ofanayim, things that come in du, in pairs, right? So he says there's no duality in it. There's no evil God and good God. There's no God of light and God of darkness, right? And there's no multiplicity in it. And it's not even like like a mathematical one, where theoretically, according to some of the myths of the other nations, for instance, if you take, I think it's the ancient Babylonians, right? There were different gods, and they were fighting each other out, and then there was one that was left. He says it's not like 2 minus 1 equals 1, or half times 2 equals 1. In fact, we only call it 1 because we don't have anything else better to call it. It's just to say that there is no multiplicity in it. Right, and if there was nothing comparable to his level of reality and his level of truth, now he's saying, Ein ki hudo ehad min ahadim hanimsaim ba'olam. There is no other form of oneness that can be compared to this one that we are attributing to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. For instance, lo ehad kimin shu kolel ahadim harbe. All right, we say, okay, we have there are many different species, and no, okay, but there's this one mean, there's this one species. It's one relative to, let's say, to the entire animal kingdom, right? There's the high someach, and then there's the medaber, and there's only one species like that. No, but this one, kolel ahadim harbe, has many different units to it. It's made up of different people. Okay, so let's go into these individuals. Okay, so we go in. Okay, so relative to the entire universe. Okay, there's just one species. That's one. I said, okay, that's a relative one, but that's not complete one, because it could be divided up into units, into different people. Okay, so let's look at this one person. He's one. Okay, relative to the entire species, yes, he is one. But he's not a complete one, because he can be divided up into parts. He has different body parts. Anyways, this type of one, there is nothing else comparable to it in the world. You won't find anything that's one in the way that we call HaKadosh Baruch Hu one. All right? We'll try to understand that soon better. Ilu hayu ha'elohot harbe hayu gufin ugviyot. We were talking about previously, in the previous class, talking about Shelilat HaGashmut. Right? One of the big differences in the approaches of let's say, the Masoret and the Rambam to esoterics as opposed to the Kabbalah is one is magshim him even more, and our approach is to take away as much gashmut as possible. So even understanding one, what does it mean that he's one? We need to understand why he's not multiple. The only way to understand one is to understand why he's not multiple. If there were multiple gods or any form of multiplicity in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, hayu gufin ugviyot. They would necessarily be in physical forms. מפני שאין הנמנין השווין במציאותן נפרדין זה מזה אלא במאורעין שיראו הגופות והגוויות. This is a somewhat difficult sentence, but we'll try to break it down. מפני שאין הנמנין השווין במציאותן. What is the nimnin? Nimnin are things that you can count. וכחיה מונה. Right? אחת, אחת ואחת. So if you could count multiple things, all in the same level of existence, השווין במציאותן, נפרדין זה מזה, the only way to differentiate between different things in the same plane of existence is only אלא במאורעים שיראו הגופות והגוויות, by physical events. Physical events, we know everything, an event in physics and science is defined as in X, Y, Z, and T, right? For instance, you have a plane of existence, look at, let's say, a table. It goes from 0 to 10, and you have two entities on this table, let's say two books. One is from 0 to 5 on the x-axis, and the other one is from 5 to 10. And that's how you can differentiate between the two books. Or it's possible that both books will be on 0 to 5 on the x-axis, but not on the y-axis, right? One will be on top of the other. Or they'll both be occupying the same space, but not at the same time. So in any event, the only way to differentiate between two entities on the same level of existence is through these physical events. And these physical events are definitive. They have defined borders. And this is what we would refer to as a guf, a physical form. שאין הנמנין השווין במציאותן נפרדין זה מזה אלא במאורעין שיראו הגופות והגוויות. All right, first of all, is this sentence understood? So going back and forth. Right, the only way to differentiate between different entities on the same plane of existence is through physical events. ואילו היה היוצר גוף וגבייה, and if the creator were confined to a physical form, היה לו כס ותכלית. He would have a beginning and an end. You would have a point where he starts and a point where he ends. שאי אפשר להיות גוף שאין לו כס. You can't be in a physical form and not have an end. וכל שיש לו כס ותכלית, יש לכוחו כס וסוף. And any physical form that has a beginning and an end, its energy or its power, its strength, has a limit to it, right? We know that, for instance, if you push down on the table, you could feel the force of resistance pushing your hand back up. But there's a limit to how much force you have in them. It's dependent on how do you call it? On the density of the matter. It's dependent on the matter itself. But there's a limit to it based on how much physical form it has. Ve'elohenu baruch shemo, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu ho'il v'kocho en lo kes ve'eno posek. Right? We know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's energy is infinite because it never ends. Sharei galgal sovev tamid, because the universe is still in existence. It's still in motion. It's always in motion. So the energy that's driving the universe is an infinite energy. So this energy, this force that's driving the universe, en koho koach haguf, does not come from a physical form. because then it would be finite. Ve'ho'il ve'eno guf, and so since his energy, which we can see, which is infinite, does not come from a physical form, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu cannot be confined within a physical form. Lo yir'u me'orot ha'gufot, and since he is not in a physical form, you can't attribute to this non-physical entity any characteristics or any events that would be attributed to physical form. לא יראו מאורות הגופות, כדי שיהיה נחלק ונפרד מאחר, so he can be separated or conjoined with something else, that he can be a part of something. Therefore, אי אפשר שיהיה עין אחד. That's why we say he can't be anything other than one. He can't be anything other than one because he can't possibly be in a physical form. And so he can't be divided. There's no multiplicity in him, and he can't be divided. So even this one that we understand, of this oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we only call it one because we don't have anything else to call it. Because it can't possibly be multiple in any way. And understanding and knowing this, or acknowledging the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is in itself a mitzvat aseh. Shene'emar, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. So he is one, and also his authority is one. One source of authority, and it's absolute. And now, from now when we say Shema, and we could be mechaven on what does this mean, Ehad, we have a better understanding, I hope, of what Ehad means with regards to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So all this that we tried now to understand logically, it's not, it's not just a philosophical debate. הרי מפורש בתורה ובנביא שאין הקדוש ברוך הוא גוף וגבייה. Right? It's explicit in the Torah and in the Tanakh and the Nevi'im that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has no physical form. שנאמר כי אדוני אלוהיכם הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל ועל הארץ מתחת. Right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu is present in the Shamayim and above, and also below the Aretz, in the Aretz and also below. והגוף לא יהיה בשני מקומות. And this would be impossible if he were confined to a physical form, because physical form cannot occupy two different spaces at the same time. ונאמר כי לא ראיתם כל תמונה. Right? You did not see any image. And if God had a physical form, he would have some sort of image that we would be able to perceive. ונאמר ולמי תדמיוני ואשווה. Right? Who can you compare me to, or make any sort of analogy between me and anything else? ואילו היה גוף היה דומה לשאר הגופים. And if he were in a physical form, he'd be similar to any other physical form. You'd say, okay, maybe it has this kind of a shape. I don't know. Maybe he's got a rectangle. Maybe he's got same way you can outline any physical form. You say, okay, just he's like 1,000,000 times bigger or 1,000,000,000,000 times bigger or whatever it is. But he has no physical form, and so he cannot be he's not comparable to anything else with a physical form. And that's why you can't compare HaKadosh Baruch Hu to anything. And there is no image that we can see and perceive. All right, אם כן, מהו זה שנאמר בתורה ותחת רגליו? כתובים באצבע אלוהים, יד השם, עיני השם, אוזני השם, וכיוצא בדברים הללו, הכל לפי דעתן של בני אדם הוא, שאינן מכירים אלא הגופות. Right? So if so, say it's explicit in the Torah and the Nevi'im HaKadosh Baruch Hu has no physical form. So what is this? The Torah says explicitly, under his feet, right? Written in the finger of God, hands of God, God's eyes, his ears. It says, הכל לפי דעתן של בני אדם הוא. Right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu cannot be compared or resemble anything, but our minds cannot perceive anything that we are not familiar with. And the only thing that we are familiar with are physical forms. So when HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to talk to us, to communicate with us, he speaks to us in a language that we can understand. However, you can train your mind to think differently. And the whole purpose of the first section of the Moreh Nevuchim is to take all of these kinuim. Etzba. What does etzba mean? Okay, we know it's a finger. It says, but mush'al gam to other things. When the Nevi'im say the word einayin, or regel, or etzba, with regards to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it says, there's something we can decode here. Each one has a specific meaning that you can analyze. For instance, it says regel. Regel doesn't just mean leg. However, it also means leregel hamelacha shelefanai. It also means causality. Okay. And then we get to the Merkava. It says shesh kenafayim la'achad, right? B'shtayim yichaser panav, b'shtayim yichaser raglav, b'shnayim ya'ofef. Okay, so what does kanaf mean? It says, kanaf could mean certain things. One of the meanings of the word kanaf is conceal. And one of the meanings of the word regel is causality. And he says, okay, so these malachim, they have some sort of aspect of them that conceals the sharsheret of causality when HaKadosh Baruch Hu does things in the world. And there's a lot to delve into that. It says, ve'amidu raglav bayom hahu. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to cause something to happen on that day. It's not talking about HaKadosh Baruch Hu's legs. Right? When HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to speak to us as a nation, דיברה התורה כלשון בני אדם, והכל כינויים הם. All these things, they're kinui. And there's a mashal behind it. Or there's a mashal with an imshal that needs to be decoded. כמו שנאמר, אם שנותי ברק חרבי, וכי חרב יש לו, ובחרב הוא הורג, אלא משל, והכל משל. Right? So I'm gonna sharpen my sword, right? And I'm gonna make it shine, right? Because Kadosh Baruch Hu needs a sword. He uses the sword to kill. No, it's just a mashal. ראיה לדבר זה, that this is all just a mashal. שנביא אחד אומר שראה קדוש ברוך הוא לבושי כתלג חיבב. Right? He says he's dressed up in snow white. ואחרי ראהו חמוס בגדים מבשרה. Another one saw him completely dressed up in red from Basra. ומשה רבנו עצמו ראהו על הים כגיבור עושה מלחמה. And Moshe Rabbeinu, just one person, same Navi, perceived them two different ways. כגיבור עושה מלחמה, ובסיני כשליח ציבור עטוף. Right? Could be a warlord, and he could also be leading the prayer. לומר שאין לו דמות וסורה. Also, an interesting thing to pay attention to over here is that nobody actually saw an image of him. They only saw his clothes that he was wearing. Right? לבושי כתלג חיוור, he's dressed in Snow White. חמוס בגדים מבשרה. Right? כגיבור עושה מלחמה, he's dressed in full gear, and in Sinai כשליח ציבור עטוף, and he's covered, he's always covered. There is no physical form that any Navi ever saw. They could, even then, the Mashal, they only perceive his outer clothing. לומר שאינו דמות וסורה, he has no form. אלא הכל במראה הנבואה ובמחזה. Same way that the Nevuah itself has a message. So when HaKadosh Baruch Hu appears in this message, he appears dressed accordingly to the message. ואמיתת הדבר אין דעתו של אדם יכולה להשיגו ולחוקרו. Right? But the truth of the matter is, understanding this oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this lack of physical form of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, nobody can fully understand it, can fully comprehend it. וזהו שאמר הכתוב, החקר אלוה תמצא, אם עד תכלית שדי תמצא. Right? Can you really interrogate, לחקור הקדוש ברוך הוא all the way? Right? If you can get down to the תכלית, what's the תכלית? מסוי הראשון, the primary being. Right? The first in the chain of causality. Do hakira as much as you can. Can you do the hakira to the tachlit? Ima tachlit shadai timsa. We have more time? All right, let's continue a bit. מהו זה שביקש משה רבנו להשיג כשאמר הראיני נא את כבודך? Therefore, okay, so if nobody could understand the essence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, nobody could perceive him, what is Moshe Rabbeinu asking? Show me your glory. ביקש לידע אמיתת הימצאו של הקדוש ברוך הוא, עד שיהיה ידוע בליבו כמו ידיעת אחד מן האנשים שראה פניו ונחקקה סורתו בקרבו, שנמצא אותו האיש נפרד בדעתו משאר האנשים. Right? Same way that a person, he knows his friend well, he knows his face, and he can perceive him, and he's able to differentiate definitively between him and everyone else. So that's how Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And also panim and ahor are also two words that the Rambam defines in the Moreh Nebuchim. Panim as amitat himaseo. You want to know something its fullest. All right? נחקקה סורתו, ככה ביקש משה רבנו להיות מסיעת הקדוש ברוך הוא, נפרדת בליבו משאר מציאת הנמצאים. He wanted to be able to differentiate between הקדוש ברוך הוא and everything else in the universe, עד שידע אמיתת הימצאו כמו שהיא. He wanted to understand the essence of הקדוש ברוך הוא and his oneness and his primariness, that's the real word, as it is, כמו שהיא. והשיבו ברוך הוא שאין כוח בדעת האדם החי, שהוא מחובר מגוף ונפש, להשיג אמיתת דבר זה על בוריו. He said this is not something that is within the capacity of a living person, right? He is limited by his guf and his nefesh, right? By his physical form to fully comprehend this. However, he didn't leave him empty-handed. והודיעו ברוך הוא מה שלא ידע אדם לפניו ולא ידע לאחריו. עד שהשיג מאמיתת הימצאו, דבר שנפרד הקדוש ברוך הוא בדעתו משאר הנמצאים, כמו שיפרד אחד מן האנשים שראה אחריו, והעסיק כל גופו ומלבושו בדעתו בשאר האנשים. However, he still taught him, he still educated him, I guess. Something that nobody else has ever reached. So he gave him a knowledge that nobody else ever got, and nobody else will ever get. Nobody will understand or has ever understood HaKadosh Baruch Hu on the level that Moshe Rabbeinu did. To the point where he understands me'amitati masel, right? Not amitati masel, but of it. דבר שנפרד הקדוש ברוך הוא בדעתו משאר הנמצאים, right? Which is what he asked for, but not on the level that he asked for, not, right? שראה פניו ונחקקה סורתו בקרבו, however, כמי שיפרד מן אנשים שראה אחוריו, right? When you see someone from afar, or you see someone from behind, and you see his body, you see his movements, you see his body language, and you see his dress, and you could understand from that, you could infer from that about the person. For instance, you see someone walking around, with his shoulders puffed up, and this, you say, okay, this guy, he's a bit arrogant, right? You see someone walking around like that, and you say, okay, he's a bit of a nebuch, this guy. Right? And you see the way a person dresses, if he dresses well, if he's like a shlump, you understand a bit about him. But it's indirect knowledge. It's not panim, it's what the Rambam refers to as zachor, it's indirect knowledge of God. And how does this happen, right? How do you acquire this indirect knowledge of God? Right? And the Torah says, what's the pasuk that says what HaKadosh Baruch Hu actually showed Moshe Rabbeinu? Right? It says, "V'ani avir kol tuvi al panecha, v'karati b'shem Hashem." What is "V'ani avir kol tuvi al panecha"? I will pass before you all of my tuvi, all of my great stuff. And the Chachamim in Midrash Rabbah, they say, that's called tuvi. Everything that says about it, "V'yomer Elohim ki tov." Meaning, he showed him Ma'aseh Bereshit. Ma'aseh Bereshit is understanding the physical world, understanding science. The more you understand science, the more you study science and understand, you can understand how God leads his creation. And you can infer things about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, through his leadership. Basically, what the Rambam is saying here is that Moshe Rabbeinu is the greatest scientist that ever lived and ever will live. He got the most scientific knowledge that man can possibly grasp and comprehend. And from that information, he had the highest level of understanding of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But there's two things there. Is "V'ani avir kol tuvi al panecha v'karati b'shem Hashem." And actually, Sam Harris, you familiar with Sam Harris? He's one of my favorite atheists. He's like, out of all the atheists I've heard, he seems most intelligent to me. Actually, I have a lot of hidushim thanks to him. Sam Harris, he has this project where he wants to find an ethical code based on nature, based on science. And he says something interesting. He says first of all, if you read the Tanakh, if or if you read the Old Testament, I'm sorry, if you read the Old Testament, and you see God is very cruel, and the laws that he gave are very inhumane and barbaric. Right? It was this chopping off a woman's hand, you're stoning people, right? And the truth is, he's not wrong. He's not wrong. We have the Torah shebichtam. The thing is that yes, the Torah could be very cruel and very barbaric if you divorce it from the Torah shebe'al peh. And along with the Torah shebe'al peh, right? Along with the Torah shebichtam, there's also Yud Gimel Midot she'atorah nidreshet bahen. And the people with the Torah shebe'al peh, we know how to read the Torah shebichtam. And when you have both systems, it's no longer barbaric, and it's not what it seems to be to someone who doesn't have the Masorah. Okay, now if you want to study, write an ethical code, morals derived from nature, you have the same problem. Nature could be vicious and barbaric. Look at how animals treat each other. Your survival of the fittest. What morals are there in that? But this understanding nature, understanding the physical world, that's the highest, that's the way we can infer Kadosh Baruch Hu's leadership of the world. So what do we have? Right, and then there's the Yud Gimel Midot. Right? So we have two systems. You can think of, just observing the physical world the same way as reading the Torah shebichtav. But in order to get any values out of it, and for it to not seem so chaotic and barbaric, we have Yud Gimel Midot. You have Yud Gimel Midot she'atorah nidreshet bahen in order to decode the Torah shebichtav. And we also have the Yud Gimel Midot of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Mahu Rahum, Afata Yeh Rahum, Mahu Hanun, Afata Yeh Hanun. Right? In order to decode the natural world that we can observe around us. And actually, the way the Rambam ends the Moreh Nebuchim, the last chapter, he brings Ali Talil Hacham B'Chochmato, Bali Talil, right? Ashir Ba'oshro, Yitel Gibor B'Gvurato, Ela Bezot Yitalel HaMitalel, Askel V'Yadoa Oti, Ki Ani Hashem, עושה חסד ומשפט, חסד משפט וצדקה בארץ, כי באלה חפשתי נאום השם. He says, your wisdom, your philosophy, understanding the oneness of God. אני תעלל חכם בחוכמתו, right? He says, even השכל וידוע אותי isn't enough. כי אני השם עושה חסד ומשפט, משפט וצדקה בארץ, כי באלה חפשתי נאום השם. It says מטרתו שיעשה מכם חסד, משפט וצדקה בארץ. Right? When you study the physical world around you, we need to learn how to interpret it in a way that it'll intensify, it'll bring up more chesed, more mishpat, and more tzedakah ba'aris. So I agree with Sam Harris on one hand. On the other hand, without the Torah, without the Yud Gimel Midot given to us in the Tanakh, even his project is futile. Right? You can perceive me from behind, meaning you can infer from my behavior about me, but you cannot perceive me fully. Since we know that he is not in a physical form, right? None of the attributes that have anything to do with physical form apply to him. No hibur velo pirut, no makom velo midah, right? No space and no size, no aliyah velo yerida, no up and down, no yamin velo small, left and right, panim ve'achor, front and behind, velo yeshiv, lo yeshiva velo amidah, ve'eno masui bazeman ad she'eh lo reshit v'achirit u'minyan shanim, right? He is not confined in time because he has no beginning and no end. He existed before the creation of time. And he does not change. There's nothing to cause him to change. Even change itself takes place over time. Meaning at time X he was like this, and at time X plus whatever, he was in a different state. You need to be affected by time in order to have any change occur in you. And that's only something that's under time. There is no death, and he has no life that resembles life of man or a physical form. His life is something else. That's in the second chapter. He talks about that. Right? He has no sikhlut, he has no, what's the word? What was it? Stupidity, but like burut, right? And no wisdom that's comparable to wisdom of man or of the wise. Velo shena, velo hakisa, right? He doesn't sleep and he doesn't wake up. Velo ka'as, velo shchok, right? Even when it says HaKadosh Baruch Hu is angry, it's just a mashal, right? Velo shchok, and he doesn't laugh either. Velo simcha, velo asvut. He doesn't have any of these emotional, different emotional states like we have. Right? He's not silent, yet he doesn't speak the way man speaks. He speaks, but even his dibur, by the way, has no shtika. So his speech is continuous too. Also never ends. Up there, even that is just a mashallah up there. Yes, doesn't sit and he doesn't stand. Sorry, up there is no yeshiva and amidah, and there's no front and back. Since this is the matter, this is the way it is. כל הדברים הללו וכיוצא בהן שנאמרו בתורה ובדברי הנביאים Akol mashal umnisahim. All these things that are said, b'shok and simcha and kas, this is all mashal. It's all menisa. And if you really want to decode the meaning of that mashal, you have to study that first section of the Moreh Nevuchim over and over again, and apply it to the text of the Tanakh. Kamo shene'emar yoshev b'shamayim nishak, right? He who sits in the heaven laughs. They made me angry with the stupidity. כאשר שש השם, and Hashem is happy, וכיוצא בהן, על הכל אמרו חכמים, דיברה תורה כלשון בני אדם. On all this, the חכמים say, the Torah spoke in the language of man. לכן הוא אומר, האותי הם מכעיסים, but they're making me mad. הרי הוא אומר, אני השם, לא שניתי. I, God, don't change. Or haven't changed. So if he hasn't changed, how could he be happy and then sad? He would be changing. וכל הדברים האלו אינם עשויים אלא לגופים האפלים, השפלים, שוכני בתי חומר אשר בעפר יסודם. All these different states of mind, emotional states, they only exist in physical forms, right? Like us and the animal world. Shochene bate homer asher ba'afar yesodam, right? When the foundation of our physical form is in afar, carbon-based life beings. אבל הוא ברוך הוא יתברך, הוא ברוך הוא יתעלה ויתרומם על כל זה. He is above all this, and he is unaffected by different things that would cause us different emotional or different mental states. And that's the first chapter. Any questions?
No questions. I found this really interesting.
Yes.
Seeing the way this relates back to Moreh Nevuchim, seeing the way the Torah Shebechtav itself is like a Torah Sheba'al Peh on the wall.
Right. The truth is, you can't really understand the Moreh Nevuchim without Ilchot Yesodey Torah. It's kind of like it has the entire philosophy, let's say, of the Moreh Nevuchim condensed in it. However, you can't understand Ilchot Yesodey Torah without having that expanded version of the Moreh Nevuchim. You have to understand one to understand the other, and you need that other one to understand the first.